Am I?
All right, welcome everyone to our panel tonight, the Virginia Redistricting Amendment, yay or nay. We're really looking forward to this program, and if you haven't already voted this year, we hope it'll help you feel more informed as you cast your ballot. If you have already voted, this should provide some good background for the vote you just cast. My name is Hannah Dannon-Belser, and I'm the chair of the Arlington Committee of 100, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. So it is impossible to miss that it is election season, and luckily for you, the Arlington Committee of 100 is focused on local issues. So you can tune out the national news cycle for the next hour and maybe 15 minutes. Hang out with us for a little while, maybe pour yourself a drink and kick back as we wrap up our series of programs to prepare you for Election Day. As Arlington voters, we have quite a number of things to vote on in addition to the presidential election. We have a vote for U.S. Senate, U.S. Congress, for Arlington County Board, and for Arlington School Board. We also have 5 Arlington bond initiatives and 2 state amendments. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about seeing the programs that we've done the last 2 months, take a look at your screen here, and we have, you can see where to view our last programs on the County Board and School Board debate and one of the contentious referendums, one of the largest for contentious referendums on the Arlington County bond initiatives. So tonight we're going to be discussing the hotly contested amendment on the ballot regarding the redistricting process. This amendment is going to set the criteria for how district lines are drawn. While this amendment would have long-term effects, it's also going to be relevant to us very soon. The last time the Virginia lines were drawn was in 2011 after the 2010 census, and new districts will be drawn up in 2021 following this year's census. We have 3 panelists with us here this evening to share their perspectives on the amendment. We have Dr. Jeremy Mayer, who is the Associate Professor in the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. He's going to give us some background information on redistricting and this amendment. We have Brian Cannon with One Virginia 2021, and he is the Executive Director of Fair Maps Virginia. He'll be talking about his support of the amendment. And we have Virginia Delegate Marcia Price, who represents the 95th District in the Peninsula area, Hampton Roads and Newport News. She's going to be discussing why she's voting no on this amendment. So those of you who know Arlington Committee of 100, you know we are an all-volunteer run organization, and I want to take a quick moment to thank our fantastic board for all of their work. I want to thank our program committee, including co-chairs Patrick Hope and Jerry Laporte. They've put a lot of time and work into this program tonight, as well as Timon Honda, who's one of our board members who also helped us coordinate this evening. So thank you guys so much. As we begin, we do want to thank the Arlington Community Federal Credit Union, who is the Arlington Committee of 100 program sponsor this year. This is actually our first year having a sponsor for our programs, and this was a really great opportunity for the Arlington Committee of 100 to take a break from collecting membership dues while we're in a virtual environment. Our board is regularly in conversation about how we can be agile and adaptable to the educational needs in Arlington and how we can best live our mission to bring timely and nonpartisan local information. We found that this virtual environment has been extremely successful in growing our reach in the community, And we're really glad to have you tuning in with us either on Zoom or on Facebook Live. Those of you who have registered with us in Zoom, you're going to be receiving announcements about our upcoming programs, so please stay in touch. To all of you, I hope you'll consider following our Facebook page where we share details about our upcoming programs, as well as live stream the program to our followers. So Election Day is coming up on November 3rd. Make sure to mark your calendar. You can also vote in person, absentee, or mail-in. The mail-in request deadline is very quickly approaching on October 23rd. So if you have not requested your mail-in absentee ballot, please make sure to go ahead and do that. You may have heard that the Virginia registered to vote deadline has been extended to tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. So if you are not registered to vote and intend to vote in this election, take a look at vote.arlingtonva.us for voting information. You should be able to check out that website. They should have some information on how to register. If you're tuning in today, you may also want to mark your calendars for Wednesday, November 18th. It will be post-election season, and we will be discussing the future of policing in Arlington. There's a lot of I know there's a lot of discussion and interest on this topic, so please keep an eye out. There's going to be an invitation coming out from us very soon so you can register. You'll notice usually we hold our programs on the second Wednesday of the month, but you'll notice that this is actually the third Wednesday of the month because Veterans Day is on the 11th. So make sure to mark your calendar for the 18th, not the 11th, and we hope you'll join us for that. Perfect, thank you. I'm watching these slides. For those in the audience, you can submit questions in the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of your screen. The slide shows you a little circle to demonstrate where that Q&A box is. We're going to get to as many questions as possible. A note that if your question is concise and to the point, it will be a lot easier for me to read in live time. When you make my life easy, it makes it a lot more likely that your question can get to the panelists. And in Arlington Committee of 100 tradition, all questions should be in the form of a question. All right, so you've heard plenty from me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the real show. We're going to hear we have three panelists here today. Dr. Jeremy Mayer, as I mentioned earlier, the associate professor associate professor in the Schar School of Policy and Government at GMU. So he is going to go ahead and kick us off. So Jerry, I'm going to pass it to you.
Great. Well, thanks. And it is an honor to be back at the Committee of 100. My dad was a longtime chair of the Committee of 100. And if he were here to see me talking to you unshaven, he would disown me, but I am wearing his lucky Virginia tie. So I've got that. And I think he was the guy who invented, please have your question in the form of a question. Anyway, I love the Committee of 100. My job is to set the table for these two advocates. I'm going to give you the background on gerrymandering in the country in 5 minutes. So in general, gerrymandering is one of the most embarrassing things about American government. Every summer we don't have a pandemic, I speak to members of the British Parliament explaining American government. And I know I've gotten it across when a couple of years ago, one of them raised hand and said, well, that's not the voters choosing their representatives, that's the representatives choosing their voters. And I said, great, you understand it. And that was taken by John Oliver, who has a nice 20-minute introduction on gerrymandering. So if you don't understand me, go to YouTube and Google John Oliver and gerrymandering and get a hellaciously funny education on gerrymandering. But it is almost as old as the Republic. The word actually comes from an obscure Massachusetts governor in the early 19th century who districted to get his supporters into the State House, and the districts that he drew, when you added them together, added up to something that looked like a salamander. So they called it a gerrymander, which has become gerrymander. In some ways, and by the way, gerrymandering continued from then on. In some ways, gerrymandering has gotten better since 1820. And this is a key way. It used to be okay to gerrymander without regard to population size. So in many states, you'd have districts that were 10 times the size of other districts in population. And that was desperately unfair, but it continued, and it mostly screwed urban voters, particularly Black voters, and it went on and on until the Supreme Court finally in Baker v. Carr said, all right, we're going to stop this and in a couple subsequent decisions, including Reynolds v. Sims, they said they had to be mathematically equal. So every 10 years since about 1970, we've really had to redraw lines because people move. They actually didn't redraw as often in the past because redistricting is always an ugly thing for a legislator to do. They would just let the population inequalities grow and grow. Now we have to fix them every 10 years. So things got better, right? Well, not exactly. Because data got better, and that's a bad thing. Normally it's a good thing to get better data. We political scientists like good data, but the combination of more and more granular data about how people voted, combined with the emergence of mapping programs like GIS, gave state legislators powers they never dreamed of. They could enter the whole map of a state into a computer and say, give us the maximum number of 55% Democratic seats, or the maximum number of seats that one party or the other will win. And in 5 seconds, they do what it would have taken a mapper from 1960, literally weeks and weeks to crunch through. Another thing that's gotten worse, if you will, is the combination of polarization and gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is both a cause and an effect of polarization. It is an effect of polarization because as the parties became more and more committed to screwing the other guy, however possible, regardless of what norms are violated, regardless of what traditions or precedents you're violating, gerrymandering got more and more extreme. But also, gerrymandering plays a role in polarization. If you are in a gerrymandered district that is, say, a 15% advantage for your party, and you reliably go into the election or re-election knowing they got about a 15% margin to play around with in the general election, increasingly in Congress and in state houses, you don't worry about the general election. You worry about the primary. If you're a Democrat, you worry about some young AOC Sanderista taking you on and showing that you once shook hands with a Republican or moderated on something or weren't 100% with AOC, and then you get primaried and you're gone. And on the right, this happened earlier, where if you had ever maybe not wanted everyone in America to have a gun as soon as possible and as many as possible, then you'd get primaried by some NRA person, or more recently, if you ever said anything negative about President Trump, you'd get primaried. So the safe seats that gerrymandering creates has increased the polarization by increasing the power of primary electorates, and they tend to be much more radical than the normal electorate. Now, it is both parties engage in gerrymandering. So, for example, in Maryland, which is a very democratic state that has a fondness for electing Republican governors, but over in the Congress and in the legislature, very, very democratic. Well, they had 6 of 8 seats, and that's 75% by my math, and that's overrepresentation of the Democrats, but that wasn't good enough for them. They figured out a way to screw one of the last remaining Republicans from Maryland in Congress out of his seat, and they drew a very bizarre map that was completely partisan, and they made it 7 of 8, which is, by my math, 87% of the seats, which is, there's a lot more Republicans than 12% in Maryland, but the Democrats just played really, really rough politics. But that's not as bad as what Republicans did in a number of other states, particularly Texas. In Texas, they broke the norm of, hey, districting only happens every 10 years, and Tom DeLay, who some of you may remember as the Hammer, decided he would push through from Congress in the Texas legislature a mid-decade redistricting, which again violated one of those norms. Now, gerrymandering makes my job easier every 2 years, right? If someone asks me, hey, political pundit, who's going to win? It used to be the case before California stopped gerrymandering that I could tell you with almost mathematical certainty who was going to win about 51 of the 53 congressional seats in California before the election, like 6 months, 3 months before. There'd be like 1 or 2 seats where maybe something might shift, but it was as reliable as anything. And then Iowa, which was one of the first states to adopt some sort of nonpartisan districting reform, there's only 4 districts. And there were years when I was like, well, I got more question about Iowa than I do about California. So the lay of the land has been set. That's the national picture of gerrymandering. and the two advocates will give you the details about the Virginia amendment.
Excellent. Thank you, Jerry. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Brian Cannon with One Virginia 2021. He's going to be talking about his support of the amendment.
Great. Thank you all for having me back. I think this is my third time speaking to the Arlington Committee of 100. Last time I did it with Delegate Levine almost a year ago. I've got a couple of things to say at the outset and to kind of help frame what we're discussing, and then I really look forward to your questions, because I find that of all the groups I speak to, you all are in the top of informed about this, which is a great way to kind of start the conversation. Let me start by saying that Delegate Price and I agree that we need a fully independent commission with all the protections possible in the amendment in the long run. I think where we disagree is, what do we do in 2021? And let me just say that I look forward to this election being over, and I can be back on the same side advocating for that with Delegate Price and others. But let's talk about the status quo. Let's talk about where we are right now. In Virginia, the Constitution says the legislature shall establish the districts in years ending in 1. It doesn't technically prohibit them from establishing the districts in years ending in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0, hence mid-decade gerrymandering, which is possible in Virginia. But it does say that the legislature shall establish the districts. It's just how a bill becomes a law. And importantly about that, it's also cloaked in legislative privilege. Legislative privilege is basically, if you have a conversation with Delegate Price or any other member of the General Assembly about legislation, which redistricting would be, that conversation is protected, and the person who holds the privilege is the legislator themselves. So perfectly fine in general, you want legislators to be able to have conversations and get information, but when it comes to redistricting, this really has created quite a smoky back room, now filled with supercomputers, where gerrymandering consultants are able to do their worst or their best, I guess, depending on which way you're categorizing it. So that's the status quo. There's a couple of other frames that I think might be useful in tonight's discussion for you, just to kind of think about how these are, because we've obviously had a lot of conversations. I do this several times a day, and I love talking about this issue, but let me lay out a couple of things. I don't think this amendment is perfect. I don't know what a perfect amendment looks like, and I'm not sure we'll ever get one through the legislature, because that's just not the nature of getting anything through the legislature. If anybody saw the movie Lincoln, it's a great example of how amendments aren't perfect. But I think this commission is about a B. I'm a former high school government teacher. I give it about a B. I think our current system is an F, and I think most folks would agree with that here. So one of the frames you're going to see tonight is, I'm going to talk about the proposed amendment versus the status quo. And I'm going to guess that Delegate Price is going to talk about the proposed amendment versus an A+ level reform, which I'm not opposed to, but it's just, the way I would suggest is, it's just not on the table for us. And we can go into that, but that's one of the frames. Another one of the frames would be a throwback for 11 months ago or 10 months ago, when I had a discussion with you all and Delegate Mark Levine. Delegate Levine has an interesting take on the Supreme Court of Virginia. The Supreme Court of Virginia is appointed through the legislature. I think it's better that we don't elect the judges, but not by much. And there's two ways you can look at the Supreme Court of Virginia. One way is that you can say that there are a bunch of Republican Party hacks just waiting to gerrymander on behalf of the Republican legislators. That's Mark Levine's way of looking at it. I don't share that. My way of looking at them is, they're generally speaking more conservative than I am personally. I'm a Democrat, but they're kind of anti-plaintiff, but their real sin with regard to this is, they give too much deference to our state legislature. As someone who's gone up to the Supreme Court of Virginia and lost a case on redistricting about compactness, let me just assure you that they basically said compactness is whatever the legislature says it is. So there's two ways to look at it. One, they're a bunch of party hacks. Another way is that they give a lot of deference to the legislature. And the last kind of frame I want to toss out there are some straw man arguments I've heard against this amendment. And I want you to be aware of them so you can watch for it. I do not say this amendment is nonpartisan. I don't say that. Occasionally, sometimes our supporters might say it online, but we really try to get people not to use the word nonpartisan for two reasons. One, it's not accurate, and two, I'm not sure what it is. I've never seen a nonpartisan commission to draw maps. Even California and Michigan and Colorado, that have excellent systems, aren't nonpartisan. They're partisan. They're just bring the partisans in and they balance it and they put some checks in there to make sure that the system works and that no one side can screw over the other. So I don't say nonpartisan. I also don't say independent, and I mean independent not in terms of like you're not a Republican or a Democrat, you're somewhere in the middle or something. No. I mean independent of the legislature. And I don't say this is an independent commission either. I wish it were. That is my ultimate goal. As someone who cares about reform a lot, that's what I want. But I don't say this is an independent commission. This is half independent. I really say it because I think most people understand it. I say this is a bipartisan commission. And then one other thing on things to look for when we're discussing this is I think there are two ways to get the outcomes we want. One is to create structures that are in place and that incentivize actors to do the good thing. And the other is to write it down in either the Code of Virginia or the Constitution of Virginia and get the written word down that says, don't do the bad thing, right? So both of those are necessary. And I think we'll talk about those today. So what does the amendment on your ballot do? The amendment on your ballot creates a bipartisan, fair, and transparent redistricting commission for the first time in Virginia's history. And it has transparency provisions. It has balance of partisans in there. It has supermajority requirements. It's got a check by the legislature to make sure that the legislature, thumbs up, thumbs down, like Iowa does. So we've stolen some ideas from Iowa and California, though not enough yet. And it's got transparency. So that smoky back room with the supercomputer, that's gone. All these meetings are public and open, and the data is too. And that's a huge piece for reformers. It also has in there historic language around civil rights in Virginia. Right now, the Federal Voting Rights Act is in place, and the Federal Voting Rights Act in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution put up two guardrails against cracking and against packing. That's restated in the Virginia in this proposed constitutional amendment, but then it also has a separate sentence that is a standalone provision on this. There's some big things here. This ends partisan gerrymandering in Virginia because structurally you wouldn't be able to get a partisan gerrymandering through that. It makes racial gerrymandering illegal under Virginia law as under Virginia's constitution for the first time ever. That's pretty big and important given our long-term and most recent history of this, and perhaps the threat at the federal level of the Voting Rights Act being further repealed or rolled back. And it adds transparency to the process, and it puts citizens at the table for the first time. Now, I'm sure we'll get into this, but I want to say that there's some questions about how we appoint the citizens, and the legislature is yet to answer those. Delegate Price was on a conference committee that killed enabling legislation that would have addressed that, how you do it administratively, extra filters, making sure that folks like lobbyists can't be on, but those that ultimately weren't adopted. It was in the Senate budget that just passed the special session. It was in the Senate budget, and I don't know what happened to it on the floor, but I've heard not great things that the House refused to adopt those guardrails on how we appoint citizens. But let me be clear, even if the whole commission is filled with a bunch of partisan hacks, the balance of partisans on it and the supermajority checks and other things like that ensure that partisan gerrymandering is dead. And that's a huge win for Virginians. And quite frankly, with unilateral Democratic control, that's what we're facing is partisan gerrymandering. This moves us a step forward. I want a fully independent commission. And quite frankly, the road to get to a fully independent commission runs through a vote yes on this amendment. And the reason is because the two things that the party in power, and the Democrats, I hope as a Democrat, stay in power, but the two things that the party in power always holds on to is the ability to screw over the other side and the ability to do it in that smoky back room. And this amendment ends both of those things. So I think it puts us in a much better place for fully independent redistricting in 2031. So with that, I'll yield my time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jerry. We've been very lucky to have Jerry and Brian both as veterans of the Committee 100, and we're really grateful for them coming back to us again. And now we have a newbie to the Arlington Committee of 100, who we are also incredibly lucky to have, Delegate Price. I just want to give a shout out. Delegate Price came right out of session immediately into our panel tonight. So thank you, Delegate Price. We know you got about 60 seconds of a break there. So thank you for joining in, and thank you for joining us here in Arlington.
Well, thank you. Because of COVID, I didn't have to travel up 95 to get to you, so I have no complaints about switching Zoom screens. But thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name was mentioned quite a bit, and so I'm glad to have my own opportunity to speak for myself and the things that I've been working on, and really and essentially protecting our democracy. I always first start by acknowledging that this is not the sexiest topic. But I promise that it's just as important as any other issue for which you may be passionate, because of the way redistricting or how districts are drawn directly impacts the composition of a legislative body, and thus impacts the policies that can be made for our Commonwealth and our nation. So whatever issue has really got you amped about the election, understand that this is foundational to that. And so it's really great to see so many people out here tonight. So I am here to urge you to vote no on number 1, and other people and organizations that share this stance in supporting your voting no include Congressman Bobby Scott, Congressman Donald McEachin, all 19 House members of the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus, 45 members of the House Democratic Caucus, the State Conference of NAACP, New Virginia Majority, Progress Virginia, SEIU, Fair Districts Virginia, the Democratic Party of Virginia, former chair of One Virginia 2021, Linda Perriello, lead plaintiff of the Supreme Court case, Golden Bethune-Hill, and University of Richmond professor of law, Henry Chambers Jr., and many, many, many other grassroots folks that you may have already seen out at your polling place if you've gone to vote, because they are just really dedicated volunteers. And we aren't saying no because we want perfect. We are saying no because we want good. And as a Black woman, I am saying no because I want inclusion. But I will get to that. This is a hard time for some to stay engaged. And I want to acknowledge this. On federal and state levels, politics has devolved into personal attacks, half-truths, and lots of money trying to influence outcomes. And so I know sometimes a back and forth and a debate can be uncomfortable. Maybe some of y'all are like Delegate Levine and y'all really thrive off of it, but I am exhausted. But I stick with this and continue to have these conversations because I really feel the need to make sure that as you look at your ballot, as you vote your conscience, you really understand what it is that you're voting on and what it does. And so the transparency that I offer is that I'm so passionate about this issue because coming from the 95th district, I've seen what years of gerrymandering has done to my community and just the suppression that it has caused. So when I got to the House, I jumped right into working on criteria bills and trying to end gerrymandering. And so I stand firm that we need reform. I just do not think that this amendment is the way. And so what's tricky, and I get questions about this all the time, what's tricky is that the ballot explanation and all of the words that you see on your ballot, the explanation, the question, and if you look up the amendment, they were all written by the same side. And so it can be very confusing, and I apologize for the games that are often played in politics, but I guess that's why we have forums like this. So I have 3 main points. One, what you have heard is that the amendment is really good for Black and Brown communities, and I say that it's not. In Amendment 1, there's no mandated diversity for the commission, and with all due respect to anyone that's on this call, we could end up with an all-white, all-male, all Medicare age commission from one area of the Commonwealth, and it would be perfectly legal based off this amendment. So then everybody's quick to run to Senator Lucas as a Black woman and say, look, we have this Black woman. It'll never happen. And well, instead of resting the future of diversity in the redistricting process on the shoulders of one Black woman, what I would say is let's put it in the constitutional amendment and make everyone live up to those expectations. And then, you know, we have to think when we're talking about, you know, the Constitution about 2031, 2041, 2051, and making sure that that same standard is there too, because diversity at the table is key. We did not have diversity at the table when this conference report came out, and it wasn't what we had been fighting for years and years. Another thing is that it's not good for Black and Brown communities because, unlike what you've heard, the specific protections that are needed in order to protect Black and Brown communities are not there. We can all agree that gerrymandering has been used to target communities of color, and that's cool. But when we talk about the 14th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act, that's just not enough to point to it without what we were working on to include in these protections. And so let's be very clear, the 14th, 15th, 19th constitutional amendments were in place when Jim Crow happened. And unfortunately, Representative John Lewis died fighting for the VRA to even be reauthorized, which has still not happened. And as we are glued to the television about what this new federal Supreme Court will look like, we have no clue what the future of the Voting Rights Act is. And so that's why we are asking for a lot of those protections to be more fully put into the amendment. So after 400 years of race-based shenanigans in 2020, I don't think that we can embrace a constitutional amendment that doesn't do enough to protect communities of color in Trump's America. Whether it becomes Biden's America or not, this is what we were putting into the Virginia Constitution. Second, what you've heard is that this commission ends gerrymandering. And I really want to talk about this because it should be known that the proposed constitutional amendment does not end gerrymandering. You cannot say that the creation of a thing prevents something from happening without telling them that they can't do it. And there aren't any words in there that say no gerrymandering. They point to other things like House Bill 1255 that I carried that I'm sure we can get into later. But we've seen in other states that when you have incumbents at the table, what you end up with are bipartisan, equally gerrymandered maps that are in turn usually incumbent protection maps. So if you have current members of the General Assembly that won because they came from a gerrymandered district, and then you have a commission that draws a map that protects incumbents, the commission drew a gerrymandered map. Gerrymandering never really ended. And so, you know, House Bill 1255 is what actually makes gerrymandering illegal. It's already law, but every single Democrat voted for it. Every single Republican voted against it. If you're a student of history, you know the pendulum of power is going to swing. And so the first day that Republicans take over, this will be gone and you'll be left with the words of the constitutional amendment. And then I'm really glad to hear, I guess we're friends now, but I'm glad to hear my friend say that this commission is not independent, because that's not what a lot of the literature has said. This is not even citizen-led, because the language of the amendment establishes a 16-member commission, as we've heard. But let's see, those 16 people, it's really important that you read the amendment to find out who they are, because if you take the 4 party leaders of the House and the Senate, they've already chosen 8 people sitting at one side. Well, what they don't tell you is they choose the pool from which the other 8 are pulled from. And so you have the, you know, before you even have the commission citizens, you got, you know, 8 legislators that are licking their chops, ready to have a chance at drawing this. And then with the other part, you know, a lot of people are thinking citizens like application process. It could be a PTA mom or a grandma from the NAACP, and that's just not true. There's no application process. There's no eligibility requirements of who it is. And why would a partisan leader who is interested in their party continuing to be in charge put someone at the table that they were not already sure was wholeheartedly aligned with their agenda? And so there's no room for third party. There's no room for independence. And again, the amendment is silent on who those citizens can be. So, you know, they're going to point to the legislative fixes. But again, legislation can be changed any year. And so we just want the same types of legal standards within the Constitution. Even yesterday, I sit on the Joint Reapportionment Committee, and even yesterday, the committee, against protests from some of us, are allowing for incumbent addresses to be used. And so that is just another point. We haven't even gotten to the table to draw yet, and we can already use incumbent addresses, which is already not about the communities. And so the last part that makes this not citizen-led is the fact that you can have a map that has 14 yes votes and 2 no votes, and all of the citizen members can be in that 14. But if 2 people from the same chamber and the same party say no, that bill is dead. And so it's just really, it's really hard to hear that we're giving more power to 2 legislators over all of the citizen friends that would be sitting there with the legislators, and that's just not citizen-led. It's not balanced, it's not fair, it's not the democratic way of doing things. And then, of course, you know, the the fact that the Supreme Court is chosen by the legislators. And the last thing that I'll just say is, you know, follow the money. I don't know why a Texas oil tycoon has $500,000 to put toward this. I don't know why organizations that don't exist online but have the same address of an investment firm, I don't know what they're trying to buy with their money. But if we get a truly independent commission, which can be on the table if we back up off this amendment, that is what is really good for Virginia, for communities of color, and for our democracy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Delegate Price. So I will say I'm officially a neutral party here this evening. I'm going to disagree with you on one point, Delegate Price. You said this may not be a sexy topic, but I have to say all three of y'all have made this sound very sexy. I am on the edge of my seat. I know I'm going to be watching this back. As soon as we end tonight, I'm going to watch this again and really digest even more everything that you've said, because I think you guys have made this incredibly interesting. So thank you to all three of y'all. So we're going to go ahead and go right to the Q&A. So these are questions from the audience. Some of these were submitted in advance of the registration, and some of these are being submitted in live time. We're going to get to as many questions as possible. We've officially advertised this event as going till 8:15. I'm going to try to wrap it up just a few minutes earlier. I know it's just a late night and folks have beds to go to. Y'all have all had long days. I know people watching have had long days. So I'm going to try to wrap up a little before 8:15. So I want to get started. These questions are to the group. A couple folks are asking more of a technical question. What happens if this amendment doesn't pass? What will the process look like next year? Can y'all weigh in on that?
So the idea that we would go back to 2011, I take issue with, because we do have House Bill 1255 in place that no matter who draws the lines, I really do want to give Virginia a shout out that we have done something proactive that not many states have done, and that we don't talk enough about ending prison gerrymandering, but that's for a different day. But Virginia really is progressive in a sense of what we've been able to pass. The other part is that there are legislative things that we can pass. I had House Bill 1256 that did not get enough votes, just shy, passed out of the House and failed in the Senate. But if the amendment fails, that bill comes back alive. We already have it ready. We can already drop it, where there would be citizens that would draw the maps prior to it getting to the legislature. And so I know that it is not the same standard of a constitutional amendment change, but it does address a lot of the concerns that we have. It would outline who could be on the Citizen Commission, who not, and that it not be any legislators at all to have an up or down vote on it. So that would be, I think, what we could do in the meantime while we're getting a better amendment. I actually think that we are 85 to 90% of our way to a better amendment once we pull some of the negotiated pieces out that were in the enabling legislation that died. I take issue with being killed, but that died because what we could not agree on was the conference report that had all of this that I'm talking about in it. It would have given voters a choice, the amendment or a citizen-led commission. And so that's what we were asking for. We were asking for it to have no self-appointments, and that was an issue for the Senate. Those party leaders wanted to be able to appoint themselves to it. So there is legislation that we could pass that could run the 2021 schedule. In 2021 session, we could get to a better amendment, and we could just go on and get that done, and we wouldn't have to spend millions of dollars coming back trying to fix a bad amendment that was put into the Constitution. We could get it right the first time.
I think the delegate is correct that all of that could happen, but I'm not sure that as a political analyst, I would expect it to happen, because most Democrats supported the amendment until they took over the State House, and now they oppose it. And I think the reason is clear to anyone that understands politics. The Democrats want some payback. The redistricting in 2011 was deeply unfair to the Democrats, not the congressional districting so much as the state house districting, but there were complaints about the House or the congressional districting as well. And this is the first time in a generation that the Democrats have controlled all three branches of the state government, the House, the Senate, and the governorship, and they want to use their power.
So I think
I'm sorry, I just have to butt in. When we say the Democrats, Brian, I do apologize. When we say the Democrats, I would really love for my Caucasian friends to stop doing is calling us all one group. What you do with that is you erase the voices that have been consistently against this amendment. We did not change. We did not flip. And if you have not polled every single one as to why they changed their vote, I think that it is cynical and it is unfair to cast aspersions on switching of votes, especially when we had to take this vote minutes after we got the conference report. So I am personally taking issue with the erasure of Black voices that have spoken out consistently against this as members of the Democratic Party. So please use qualifiers so that we can tell the story and tell it accurately.
There's a lot to unpack here. Let me suggest that that the Delegate Price is correct. She's been consistently opposed to this from the beginning, as have a lot of her members of of the House Legislative Black Caucus. Some of them changed their votes to no this year, and one of them kept their vote is a yes this year. But their points for consistency. The folks flipping, nothing changed in the amendment because it's been the same since February 23rd. But if the biggest complaint about the amendment itself is that there are legislators involved, which is my biggest complaint about it too, by the way, that there are legislators on the commission, then that was introduced in January 9th of 2019. So that wasn't like a last minute, last second change. That was in there. The other objection is that it goes to the Supreme Court of Virginia as a backstop. That was also in there from the beginning. So I don't really buy that, those kind of like last minute changes. We didn't know what was coming. It was really obvious what was coming. But that being said, vote against it. Everybody has a right to do that. There's so many things to hit here. Here's the problem, is that HB 1255 is good law. It is really good law. I'm 100% in favor of it. I think it's made better by this commission because the commission would have to follow the law. Because remember how I told you there's two ways to look at the state Supreme Court? Either they're a bunch of party hacks that are Republicans just waiting to gerrymander, or they're too deferential to the legislature. Those are really the two schools of thought here. Well, 1255 has good language that says you can't draw maps that unduly favor one party or another, but there's no standard for what unduly favor is. And you don't want necessarily per se a mathematical answer there. But to enforce it against the legislature, because they could draw maps and say we didn't unduly favor anybody, but then we say, no, you really did. We'd have to go to, you guessed it, the state Supreme Court to enforce. And whether you think they're party hacks or you give too much deference to the legislature, the net result is it's pretty much unenforceable against the legislature because they can do whatever they want. It's a high degree of deference, and I don't agree with it, but that is what it is. So either way, HB 1255 is virtually unenforceable against the legislature, and the kicker is the legislators know that. They know it. They know exactly what they're doing here. So while I'd like to get them all out of the process, that's not on the table. That's not an option. I do think you get a diverse commission because you'll have Senator Lucas and Speaker Fillercorn making half of the appointments either directly or indirectly. But I also find it a little bit rich that the most of the vote no crowd, Delegate Price and everybody, voted against the enabling legislation repeatedly, from Senator Louise Lucas. SB 203 voted against it and killed it in conference committee, or it died in conference committee, when it was just there to fix a couple of small wording choices and things like that. It wasn't meant to add on some big alternative commission that never saw the light of day, by the way. It was meant to address a couple of small pieces in that, and we could have had those filters that guaranteed diversity on the commission, that guaranteed that Black and brown voices would be there. So, but Delegate Price and Delegate Simon voted no and said to Mel Lenore at the RTD right afterwards, basically, we did this to make the amendment stand on its own. So they had a choice to either focus on policy and protect Black and brown communities right there, or they could play politics with it and try to stop the amendment at the ballot box. Either one's a fine answer, but let's be clear which one they picked. They're playing politics with it and they're trying to stop it at the ballot box.
So Hannah, there was no yes or no vote. There was a sheet that asked for signatures. Whose signatures were on there? Simon and Price. No one else signed it. And every single part of the bill that he said I voted against was in the conference report. The idea that this citizen commission didn't see the light of day was House Bill 1256, where I might have been a little nervous, but I had a press conference about it. It was open. It went before the House and the Senate and stayed alive in the Senate longer than I even thought it would. And so
How long
the
did HB
idea that
1256 stay independent, Delegate Price?
House Bill 1256 that was introduced in the light of day, Brian, had an independent commission. So what I'm saying, sir,
I'm just asking you, for how long is that
as I
independent
was trying
commission
to
there?
finish my thought, because I let you finish. I am rebutting what you said, but I did let you finish. So House Bill 1256 came out. Who killed it were the people that want the amendment to pass because they don't want independent redistricting. And so it is rich for me that my character is being called into question as to whether or not I'm for or against this newfound power when I've been consistent. But what they're not doing is going and turning around to the people who, it could be just two that are in the Senate that are actually the ones holding up us from being able to get fully and truly independent. And so these two people get hailed as redistricting champions because they're for a process that keeps legislators at the table, but they won't denigrate them and they won't come after them for being the roadblocks to independent commissioning, which their organization was founded upon. And so it's rich to be, the source of so much consternation when literally we are trying to get at the thing that they were fighting for before they got all the money, before they switched to this compromise. And so if we're going to talk about what people's, if we're going to talk about why people are doing what they're doing, I would ask two of the folks that are on the side of this, why are we going from 140 members being a part of it to 8 members? Why are we distilling legislative power? So if you're afraid of legislators, you are pulling out all of the dissenting voices, because anyone that would stand up to one of those party leaders and say, no, this is wrong, they're not going to be at that table. So don't expect that this is going to be like the holier than thou legislators that are there, because if you think that, you're being naive and you don't know how legislators act. And the party leaders, again, are going to choose people not only of the legislators, but of their friends for the pool that the citizens are pulled from. They're going to pull from people that know the agenda. And so this idea that the existence of a thing stops all of the bad things is just ridiculous. And once that goes away, and there is no more choice of this, whatever this amendment is, I call it a sham because it really is not, as was mentioned, it's not independent, it's not nonpartisan, it's not even bipartisan. It is hyper-partisan for those two people that can veto. It is bad for Black communities. If that goes away, the conversation changes. And now we can talk to the people that are against independent redistricting, which is what is actually polling highest in this state. And then we can get to some real reform. But while you have this trick dangled in front of them and you've taken the focus away from the people that are the true obstacles for the reform that the people want, it gets really interesting to me that that the fire comes the way of the people that want the independent redistricting.
So on 12,
I'm just going to step in and say I'm glad we've got a lot of good commentary here going. I'm just going to ask Brian, if you could just keep your remarks as brief as possible, because I want to make sure we have some time to get to other questions too, but I'm glad we're having a good conversation here.
Delegate Price introduced HB 1256 was an independent advisory commission. That's good. It's a good commission. We supported it, but the problem is that it was only advisory. It wouldn't have had any teeth, and we saw what advisory commissions did prior to this in 2011. And what's important, and I was surprised to see it, but what Delegate Price wasn't telling you is that she had to change her HB 1256 from an independent advisory commission to a hybrid bipartisan advisory commission to get it out of a House committee chaired by Delegate Simon. So it didn't get to the floor of the House of Delegates. No independent, even advisory only commission got to the floor of the House of Delegates. And when you have the votes for something, you hold a vote. And the House Dems didn't have the votes. And the Republicans aren't helping them here. They're not having the votes for it either. But we don't have the votes for a purely independent commission. I wish we did. We just don't.
Thank you both. So we're gonna take a different tact here. This question specifically is to you, Professor Mayer, but if Delegate Price or Brian, if y'all want to weigh in on this, please feel free. From Timon, he says, I've heard of a computer algorithm that can draw districts with equal population and optimizes the compactness of each district. Congressional districts generated by the algorithm are separated by relatively straight lines. So what do you think of using this method to draw districts?
I think it's a good move forward, because what the Supreme Court has always said is that they can't really address compactness because they have no neutral standards. It's all a mess, and mathematicians and political scientists came up with this. It's exciting, it's new, and it would be a fair way to do it. I would add to that algorithm, though, something that we've really lost in this modern era of redistricting, which is respect for existing political boundaries. You know, if I've lived in Arlington most of my life, and I think I've lived in 3 different congressional districts and never moved very far away because we redistrict so radically every 10 years. And I think that needs to be in there as well. You used to have a sense of what the 10th district is, and now that can change rather dramatically.
Thank you. Brian or Delegate Price, would either of y'all like to make any comments? No? All set. All right.
I should add also that it does take the politics almost completely out of it when you start to give power to artificial intelligence. But I guess if you watch enough of the Terminator movies, there could be a scary scenario.
Great. So I think y'all have referenced this a little bit, but if you could maybe Paul specifically asked, what prevents the Virginia Supreme Court from becoming the final arbiter of the map? Is there do y'all want to address that?
Sure, Delegate Price. So the Supreme Court of Virginia is the backstop if the commission deadlocks. That's standard practice in redistricting reform all over the country. In Virginia, it was put in by Senator George Barker, Democratic senator from Fairfax, Clifton area. And there are really 2 options for a deadlock commission, because every commission could fail, right? Especially if you have one with a supermajority requirement, it could fail. Now, that being said, none of them have, but in the case that it does, where does it go? Right? And the answer is, even if you say nothing, it goes to the courts. But there's 2 real options. It could go to the courts, or it could go back to the legislature. Now, here's what's important to know about those 2 options. As a reformer, there's never an example of a court in this country gerrymandering. Courts don't gerrymander. They hire special masters. They draw boring down the middle of the road lines that neither side's super happy with, but are objectively kind of neutral. So while no court's ever gerrymandered, no legislature has ever not gerrymandered. Right? And if you have those 2 choices, as a reformer, I'll take the court every day and twice on Sunday.
All right, thank you. So we have a couple questions on phrased in various ways that if y'all have perspectives on ACDC, the Arlington County Democratic Committee, and the position that they've taken on this amendment, they are opposed to the amendment. I know there's a lot of different opinions within the Arlington delegation and different votes. Do y'all have any comments that you want to add in terms of that ACDC position that's been taken and the delegation in general?
I'm not here for party. I'm here for people. So even though, you know, I'm a Democrat, I'm not sure that is, I don't know, like, yeah.
I would only add, yeah, I'm not sure how much the parties matter to this. Sample ballots certainly matter, and that's been a focus of the Vote No campaign, is to get sample ballots from Democratic committees. But, you know, if you look at, like, I think A+, generally speaking, reformers agree, California's A+ level reform is really, really a good system, and I hope we can get closer to that for the next cycle. But it's worth knowing that the party in power always fights reform. Just always. It's guaranteed. It's like clockwork, right? It's why we don't have redistricting reform in Maryland, Illinois, or Massachusetts, because the Democrats are in control and they don't want to not be. In California, when their proposition was put on the ballot, Speaker Pelosi spent $10 million trying to defeat independent redistricting in California. So, you know, I think she's a convert now. You know, obviously HB won. was a great piece of legislation that Representative Don Beyer championed. By the way, Don Beyer has endorsed this this amendment as well in Virginia. So I feel pretty good about knowing that the party in power always opposes this, which is also, we've gotten a lot of more Republican support in the last little bit, and it should come as no surprise because they're not in power anymore. In fact, that's the whole reason we got this even Steven bipartisan redistricting, was because Republicans in 2019, they had a really weak sauce reform proposal out in their original bill, HJ 615. But then when they found out that the court had adopted the new maps for the House of Delegates during the session, they got religion on this issue real quick. Not as much as I would like, but certainly more than they had before.
I'd also like to add, there is a national argument over this, and Brian's right that you always see the party out of power being for redistricting reform. But nationally, if you ask the Democrats to give up their chance to redistrict Virginia, they might be willing to do that if the Republicans would give up the screwing they're giving Democrats in Texas and a bunch of other states. The long-term hope is for the Congress to finally address this and to use their time, place, and manner power. Yeah, I know, I'm a dreamer too. I can't believe the reformers laughing at me. I've tried to be cynical.
I'm an optimist, but that's tough.
but I really believe that in the long run, there's so many things wrong with American politics right now. There's so many structural flaws in our democracy. We have the worst voting administration system in the industrialized world. But you could fix this with one bill in Congress that would make it illegal to partisan district in every state in the land.
I will say, though, to your point, Professor, is that if you look at the 5 states that passed redistricting reform in 2018, it was Ohio, Missouri, Michigan, Colorado, and Utah. Pretty diverse group of states, right? 4 of those states actually went red in 2016. So the argument about Democrats unilaterally disarming, I kind of get. There's, if California does fair redistricting, Texas should too, and we're not there yet in Texas. But there are a lot of states doing this in red and blue manners. There were 6 states that were likely to get reformed this year. We're the only one left on the ballot. All the others have been booted by the party in power. In Nevada and Oregon, the Democrats stopped it. Oklahoma and Arkansas and North Dakota, the Republicans stopped it.
And if we're defining reform as just a commission, then that may make sense. But other circles are also still celebrating the fact that House Bill 1255 is redistricting reform in a sense that it's a proactive criteria bill. But I would just reiterate, I am not here because I want to maintain power. I get called a fool behind closed doors all the time and not even by legislators, but because Democrats are like, why would you want it to be independent? 20 years they've been sticking it to us. And I'm like, well, in 1966, I wrote a paper about how gerrymandering was bad for Black people, and I still believe it. And I'm really, truly in trying to fight that. I also think that as the younger folks are taking up more, they are more independent thinking. And it would be great for us to start allowing for more voices to be at the table that aren't as entrenched in this 2-party system. And again, allow for dissent to be at the table as well, which this 8 and 8 would not allow for.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pose the final question. I'm going to ask we're at 8 o'clock, and we're going to do our best to, as I said, we're going to do our best to wrap up before 8:15. So I'm going to ask each of our 3 panelists to be as concise as you possibly can be in answering this next question. So I'm going to ask you to each look into your crystal balls a little bit about 2021, what things are going to look like. Can you tell me what you think things will look like if this passes and if this fails? I'm going to start. I'm sorry, we went with Jerry, you spoke first, so can you, we're gonna go to the original order. Jerry, will you go first?
So I think this amendment will pass. I think that the leadership of the Democratic Party is against it now, or many of them are. It's not a unified leadership, but I think that the people, Republicans voting, many of them maybe cynically, but many of them sincerely reforming, but a lot of Democrats are gonna be believing what Democrats were saying not so long ago about this amendment. And I expect it will pass. If it does pass, I think it'll be a very interesting, the delegate is right, it could end up being partisan, it could end up being thrown to the Supreme Court. But I do think even if that happens, I agree with the Washington Post, I think it'll be an improvement. If it doesn't pass, then the Democrats are going to have to show us all that their objections were not cynical and that they really wanted a better system. And they're going to somehow do what Brian accurately says no legislator has done, which is not use their power to screw the other party.
All right, Brian.
So if the amendment passes, I think we get better districts. I don't think we get as good a districts as we get if we had a fully independent commission. And it's a little bit of a low bar to trip over to say that we get better districts, but I do think we get better districts. At the very least, we make sure we don't get a partisan gerrymander, because you can't structurally get that through. And we get to be watchdogs on it, because for the first time ever, we'll actually be able to see what the hell they're doing. So if the amendment fails, then I don't actually have a lot of faith that we're going to have it. And I do believe that Delegate Price would never vote for a racial gerrymander or a partisan gerrymander. I do believe, while we vehemently disagree, as you can tell, that she genuinely does want redistricting reform. The problem is, in this discussion, the vote no side, there's some of her colleagues that actually don't want reform. And then there's those who do really want reform, but they're both saying the vote no side, and it's hard to tell the difference. But if I'm looking at what the Democratic track record is on this, it's not great. And you can look back, as far as you want, but you don't even have to look back further than 2018. In 2018, and this is, keep in mind, after the big blue wave of 2017, which, brought in a lot of really smart, young, progressive Democrats. I think it's awesome. But even after that big blue wave, in 2018, the federal court said to the state legislature, your maps are racially gerrymandered. You've got to undo that. Gave it back to the legislature to draw maps. And we had at the time 12 majority-minority Black districts. 11 of those were struck down. In the redraw, the Republicans gave one more Black district in there. And the Democrats did a redraw too, and they gave one more Black district as well. Whereas the Princeton Gerrymandering Project and the folks at Tufts University, Moon Duchin and her crew, looked at it and said we should have at least 3 more Black districts. So I don't trust the Democrats not to partisan or racially gerrymander, not because the 2011 ones were bad, but because the 2018 ones were bad. And so if you think about what makes it better in the long run, how, if we have the same players but the leverage is gone, how are we going to get a different outcome?
Thanks, Brian. All right, Delegate Price, will you wrap us up?
Yeah, so it's actually an amazing segue, because I think that legislators are trash at gerrymandering. Like, I think that we are. And we are asking the no side to take us out of the process. And if you want all of the things that Brian just described that happened in 2018, because what he didn't tell you was that it was actually tit for tat. The racial gerrymander actually came from the Republican side. It was used as a base. But there are some golden children that are on the side of his amendment that he touts very well, that were fully willing to trade behind those same closed doors that we were accused of, to trade a racial gerrymander for a political gerrymander to make it easier for them to run. So yes, both sides are terrible because we are self-interested. And what I am saying is that now we're trying to bake 8 of them, the terrible people that we've just described, bake 8 of them into the process and then bring along 8 of their friends. And then we expect it to be better. And that is what is so astonishing. We are such terrible people that you can't trust us to do it, but put 8 of us and 8 of our friends at the table. That is ridiculous. And I am absolutely encouraged at the momentum that we have on the streets, because every time I have a conversation with someone and explain what it does and what it doesn't do, we have gained in the polls and we have gained momentum. And so there might be some people that are resting on their laurels, but we're not. We're going to continue to go out and tell this story and let people know how bad this amendment is and how much better we can make it.
Thank you, Delegate Price. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Delegate Price. This has been a really fantastic panel. I think we have a lot of folks who are feeling much more prepared for November 3rd, and if they've already voted, they're thinking a lot about those ballots they've cast. So thank you again to all 3 of you for joining us tonight. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate you accepting our invitation. I'm going to ask everyone who's watching, just stick with us for just 1 more minute. I want to say another thank you to Patrick Hope, Jerry Laporte, Timon Honda, who coordinated this program, and as well, we really appreciate their work. And a special shout out to Scott Pedowitz and Timon, who have been behind the scenes tonight. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at a couple different screens, making sure we're moving along, and Scott and Timon are quietly in the background helping me out with that. So thank you, Scott and Timon. They made me look a lot better than I would if they were not there. So thank you. So everyone, just make sure that you watch for the invitation for our next program, which is going to be on the future of policing in Arlington. It will be post-election season. I know all of us, every single one of us, are counting down for the end of election season. I don't know anyone who's not. So I think we're all going to be really happy to move on to another hot topic that is also going to be really exciting. And I think we're also going to have a lot of spirit around this discussion because it's also incredibly important. So if you want to watch tonight's recording, please make sure to like our Facebook page, Arlington Committee of 100, facebook.com/ArlingtonCTE, and you can see the Facebook Live. If you have someone who you think needs to see this program, consider sharing that live link with everyone. So thank you again to everyone who joined us tonight. We'll see you again next time, gloriously after November 3rd. Bye, everyone, and good night.
Great job, Hannah.